What I would like to do is sort of make the link between sort of the external dimension of data governance and what is happening in the EU with the EU data strategy. So I'll talk a little bit about cross-border data flows, a topic that was taken up this morning and seen as quite important. And as you know, post-GDPR, what happened is that the EU has become much more proactively involved in this area of actually permitting cross-border data flows and banning data localization measures. And it happens not only through the adequacy decisions, a channel that we know pretty well, but it actually happens in these trade agreements that the EU enters with a number of partners so far, of course, the UK post-Brexit, but then also New Zealand and Japan. So what is interesting with this sort of a new repositioning of the EU in this global landscape, so not only internally but in the global landscape, is that the EU clearly acknowledges the importance of having free data flows not only within sort of the boundaries of the Union but also across countries. And this is relatively new actually in the position of the EU, and is also very important, especially as you know that the United States recently decided to disengage on the topic of data flows, basically saying in November of last year under the Biden administration that they need to have a digital rethink. And there was a lot of discussions whether this was because of TikTok and sort of banning and restricting TikTok, but actually looking at the documents, it has to do quite clearly with the regulation of big tech within the United States. So in this sense, the EU now sort of have a competitive advantage in this area, and the United States, after 20 years of pushing the topics, now lagging behind. So what this also goes to show a little bit is that the GDPR is very, very important, of course, but it is only sort of a one component, one element of the entire puzzle that we have of sort of this data governance, and this data governance has also an important external dimension. We do have exceptions in these treaties with regard to personal data protection. And a good example for this is the EU-Japan agreement. It just entered into force, the update on the 1st of July 2024. And it's also very innovative in its design. So the EU is really pushing here the agenda also on this front. It's a treaty that for the first time also mentions the OECD Declaration on government access to personal data held by private sector. The EU is in a sort of a tricky exercise of sort of managing, navigating its data/digital sovereignty in a sense. So it is doing a lot of things at home, and it somehow has to translate or link some of the efforts that come from the international scene or certain regional efforts. And there is a danger here a little bit. One, of course, is that sort of data protectionism is a little bit inherent in the agenda of the EU, and there is another more sort of a wider danger that has to do with the regulatory fragmentation, in the sense that if we have many very different regimes across countries, across regions, this in itself is a barrier to competitiveness. It is a barrier to actually reaping the economic benefits of the data-driven economy. It is interesting also in this context to observe what the UK has been doing post-Brexit, and it has been moving away from the EU. It has subscribed to a sort of a new agenda of openness rather than being more restrictive and protective within the country, and it's as part of its UK data strategy. One important sort of element is championing international data flows. So we're going to see how this is going to work out. On the one hand, with a sort of the review of the adequacy decision, and whether this is going to have any implications even for the trade and cooperation agreement. But I think it's important in this discussion, when we think about the GDPR and innovation and competitiveness more broadly, to have this global aspect as well.